The subcommittee hearing will come to order. Today, we meet to receive testimony on regional missile defense capabilities. This includes the Patriot system, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD system, and the Aegis, or Aegis weapons system. Testing before the subcommittee today are Mr. John D. Hill, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space and Missile Defense Policy, Major General Sean Gainey, the Director of Fires within the headquarters of the Department of the Army, Rear Admiral Doug Williams, who as of yesterday is no longer the Acting Director of the Missile Defense Agency, but is now Director of Test at MDA. I guess there have been a lot of promotions here in the last couple days.
Yes, sir.
And finally, Brigadier General Claire Gill, the Joint Staff's Deputy Director for Regional Operations and Force Management. Thank you all for being here with us. As the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East continue to demonstrate, missile defense capabilities are becoming increasingly important on the modern battlefield. However, demand for these systems continues to outpace supply. And in recent years, the force has experienced significant stress attempting to meet the needs of our combatant commanders. This suggests we are far below what will be needed in a conflict with a near-peer adversary. This issue will only get worse as the need to increase deterrence in the Indo-PACOM theater becomes more urgent. Over the last month, we've seen Iranian proxies attempt to sink U.S. military and civilian vessels transiting the Red Sea. These attacks by the Houthis, which were named a foreign terrorist organization by the Trump administration, has only intensified over the past week. U.S. missile defense assets in the area, particularly those aboard the USS Carney, were able to intercept some of the incoming missiles and UAVs. This quick action likely saved the lives of U.S. Navy sailors and commercial seamen. We look forward to hearing from our witnesses on how the Department manages these scarce assets and whether additional capacity is necessary. While not the subject of today's hearing, I must express my concern about reports that the Department is considering early down selects to a single contractor on several key missile defense programs. Maintaining multiple competing industry teams helps limit risk in developmental programs, and this subcommittee will closely scrutinize any decision to eliminate competition so as to ensure that a sufficient rationale exists. I'm similarly concerned that the Department may be reconsidering a transfer of the Missile Defense Agency's responsibilities for the THAAD program to the Army. The idea of transitioning mature missile defense programs from MDA to the services is not new. However, the Department's longstanding and consistent position in the case of THAAD has been that doing so would be disruptive and unnecessarily would add risk to the program. Based on this argument, last year's Defense Authorization Bill repealed a standing requirement for such a transfer. If the Department's view has now changed, I would expect that it would thoroughly consult with this committee. The Department must explain why it is reopening this issue and considering changes that, per the Department, would put THAAD at risk. The fiscal year 2024 National Defense Authorization Act has several key provisions on regional missile defense. Among other things, it includes additional THAAD interceptors and an acceleration of the Glide Phase Interceptor program for hypersonic missile defense. I cannot emphasize enough how critical it is that we get the NDAA signed into law at the soonest possible time. With that, I recognize Ranking Member Seth Moulton for any opening comments he may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd also like to welcome our panel of distinguished witnesses here on December 7th, the 82nd anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. In Ukraine, Israel, and around the world, our adversaries are using missiles to attack not just military targets, but diplomatic facilities, energy infrastructure, commercial shipping vessels, and civilian populations. Fortunately, their success has been limited in part due to deployed missile defenses, many of which are developed and produced by the United States. During one of this subcommittee's previous hearings, I laid out the 4 levels at which missile defenses might be used. Level 1, strategic defense against peer adversaries. Level 2 addresses a capability to address rogue nation threats. Level 3, while somewhat of a nuance, is the ability to defeat an accidental launch of a near-peer adversary. Level 4 is regional tactical level missile defense. And level 5 is the foundational level of being able to detect and track threats from the moment they are launched throughout their flight and up until they reach their impact point. Today, we are focused on that fourth level, regional or tactical missile defense. In the last 2 years especially, we have seen how important this is. Ukraine has received incredible support from allies and partners on air and missile defense, which has enabled them to fight back against near nonstop Russian missile attacks. It's safe to say that not only have these systems saved countless civilian lives, but they are a key reason Ukraine has been able to maintain its sovereignty almost 2 years after war criminal Vladimir Putin's criminal invasion. In Israel, we continue to witness the critical daily role that tactical missile defenses play in defending Israeli citizens from rocket, artillery, mortar, attack drone, and ballistic missile threats being launched into the country. For years, these defensive systems, like the famed Iron Dome, have also saved Palestinian lives because previously, the only protection Israel found against these attacks was hitting back offensively. Imagine if the bombing, like we've seen over the past 2 months, happened every time rockets were fired at Israel over the past 2 decades. The administration has also shifted U.S. force structure in the region, deploying the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, battery to Saudi Arabia, adding Patriot battalions, and increasing Aegis BMD at-sea presence. These systems have not only defended against attacks on U.S. deployed forces, but also against attacks aimed at commercial shipping vessels in one of the most congested and vital thoroughfares of global trade. While these systems are performing well operationally, this confluence of global aggression has spotlighted our limited capacity to address the growing requirements from each of the combatant commanders, primarily in Indo-PACOM, CENTCOM, and EUCOM. With a finite number of Aegis BMD-capable ships, THAAD batteries, and Patriot battalions, at some point, a point we may have already reached, any changes in our regional missile defense posture will almost certainly induce risk somewhere else in the world. The limited capacity of regional missile defense capabilities highlights a central issue in the missile defense policy debate. Missile defense to date has been on the wrong side of the cost equation, and at the end of the day, it is a simple numbers game. For example, the USS Carney has recently shot down several Houthi missiles using Standard Missile 2 interceptors. Those interceptors have a per-unit cost of $2 million, more than double the cost of the cruise missiles they shot down. This is why we must look at next-generation capabilities as well, capabilities that can flip the cost paradigm, such as directed energy, cyber, and other innovative solutions that are not one-for-one point defenses. Only then will we have a decent chance of stopping our adversaries from relying so heavily on missile technology. Lastly, while we are here today primarily to talk about systems and capabilities, we would be remiss not to discuss our greatest asset when it comes to missile defense, the soldiers and sailors assigned to the Aegis BMD ships, Patriot battalions, and THAAD batteries around the world. I remember the early days of Iraq and Afghanistan, when the missile defense community had little to do. But recently, these troops have been overtaxed, experiencing shorter and shorter deployment dwell times, and GAO has repeatedly reported on the negative impact on readiness and training for the community. The Navy, though less discussed, is not immune to these issues either. The independent review conducted after the collisions of the USS McCain and Fitzgerald, both Aegis BMD-capable ships, highlighted the increased op tempo on the crews due to long at-sea deployments and increasing mission requirements, and how those contributed to basic training often being skipped. While this subcommittee tends to focus on the high demand of the weapon systems, we cannot forget about the impact of this intense global demand for missile defense that it places on the men and women who are at the core of our capability. Missiles are an integral part of the modern way of war, and thus so too is missile defense. I look forward to discussing with the witnesses where we can improve these systems and innovate towards the future capabilities we need to meet the increasingly complex missile threats proliferating around the world. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Okay, we hear that votes are projected to be at 10:30, so we'll go ahead and start in with our testimony, and then we'll move to members' questions. You'll each have 5 minutes. Your full statements will be part of the record. Mr. Hill, you're recognized first.
Chairman Lambourne and Ranking Member Moulton, distinguished members of the committee, of the subcommittee. On behalf of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, thank you for the opportunity to testify today alongside my distinguished colleagues. The ongoing conflicts in Europe and the Middle East underscore the centrality of missiles in modern warfare and global strategy. Likewise, for U.S. forces and U.S. allies and partners around the world, in this era of missile-centric warfare, active missile defenses have become an essential element of a credible military force posture. In the most basic sense, integrated air and missile defense, or IAMD, encompasses diverse sensors and shooters with the command and control systems that network them together to give battlefield commanders the optimal selection of interceptors to defend against a given threat. Space-based sensors and networks are an increasingly important component of IAMD systems for homeland and regional defenses. But in a broader sense, IAMD must also be integrated with other elements of military posture, including strike systems that can hold an adversary's critical military capabilities at risk. Moreover, IAMD must also incorporate passive defenses, including resilient critical infrastructure and broader missile defeat options, such as electronic warfare and supply chain interdictions that disrupt proliferation channels. The IAMD efforts of the United States, our allies and partners, are sound in the face of evolving and expanding threats. These efforts are advancing shared national security interests in the defense of freedom and common values. However, protecting national security is a process of continual investment and funding. And as Secretary Austin has emphasized, although the passage of another continuing resolution has put off the threat of a lapse of funding, operating under continuing resolutions hamstrings the department's people and programs and undermines both our national security and competitiveness. Further, passing supplemental funding can ultimately strengthen our national security, deter our adversaries, meet our commitments to allies and partners, and ensure Israel and Ukraine have the military capabilities they need to succeed. I thank you again for this opportunity to testify. You have my full written testimony for the record, and I thank you for the role this subcommittee plays in supporting our homeland and regional integrated air and missile defense interests around the globe. I look forward to our discussion and your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Major General Gainey.
Chairman Lambourne, Ranking Member Moulton, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. On behalf of the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army, thank you for the opportunity to highlight the importance of regional missile defense. As you know, air and missile-related threats have rapidly expanded in recent years in quantity, variety, and sophistication. Current events around the world highlight the criticality of missile defense as a force for deterrence and as an essential element of our national defense. These challenging and important times for the Joint and Integrated Air Missile Defense Force, and while specific details of current and planned deployments are more appropriate for a closed session, I can say that the Army Air and Missile Defense remains the Army's most heavily deployed force with the highest demand signal among the combatant commands every year. In that context, the importance of the work that our air and missile defense soldiers do each and every day in support of the Army and the nation cannot be overstated, and I want to thank you for your continued support to them and their families. Our Army's contribution to defeating the wide range of evolving threats in advancing and continues to improve in both capability and capacity as we build towards the future Army. This additive capability and its associated force structure is designed not only to defeat the threat, but to minimize the impact on soldiers and their families. But capability does not consist only of material solutions. The amazing soldiers that operate and sustain these systems remain our true center of gravity. Recruiting and retaining the nation's top talent for our Army and air and missile defense forces is the linchpin of our success. Caring for our soldiers and their family is paramount to win in any environment around the globe. A critical point to emphasize is that integrated air and missile defense is a shared responsibility across the service. No one service by itself will have enough capability and capacity to protect every critical asset across the globe. Therefore, to reduce the burden, the Army continues to work with our joint service partners to include the U.S. Navy Aegis Ballistic Missile Defense and the U.S. Air Force Offensive Counter-Air Operations. Integration with allies and partners on missile defense is also an important priority to strengthen international cooperation and defeat our shared threats. Integrated deterrence with our allies and partners provides commanders layered and tiered options to degrade, disrupt, and defeat adversary air and missile defense threats. Our ability to protect the homeland and our collective interests abroad is dependent on burden sharing between our air and missile defenses and that of our partners. Let me conclude by saying that I take great pride in the efforts and sacrifices made by all soldiers and their family on behalf of the nation. The Army recognizes the demand placed on the force and has taken significant and aggressive steps to enhance regional air and missile defense capabilities and capacity, as well as implementing important quality of life improvements. The Army will continue to work with joint service partners and allies to better integrate their defenses into the overall missile defense architecture. The Army appreciates the continued support and significant investments from Congress. Thank you for shedding light on this important issue today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Rear Admiral Williams.
Chairman Lamborn, Ranking Member Moulton, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, it is an honor to appear before you today. Since its inception in 2002, the Missile Defense Agency has developed numerous missile defense capabilities to enhance the regional defense posture of combatant commands to counter increasingly diverse missile threats. Globally deployed ship-based and land-based Aegis ballistic missile defense capabilities are a critical part of the missile defense system. There are currently 49 Aegis BMD capable ships, as well as Aegis ashore sites in Romania and Poland. The Standard Missile-3 class of missiles provide BMD mission capabilities across fleet areas and have been vital to the success of the European Phased Adaptive Approach, which is the U.S. contribution to NATO missile defenses. Additionally, the SM-6 is available to the Navy for a limited defense against hypersonic missile threats and is a key part of the sea-based terminal defenses currently in operation. MDA develops, produces, and fields the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, weapon system for the Army. The THAAD system is combat-proven, and 8 THAAD batteries have been procured, and 7 are currently fielded to the U.S. Army. Current plans for improving Aegis BMD and THAAD system performance involve efforts to increase missile defense quantities and to improve the quality of missile defense through greater integration of deployed capabilities and development of new systems, such as our efforts with the Hypersonic and Ballistic Tracking Space Sensor and Glide Phase Interceptor. Additionally, MDA continues to strengthen defenses against all regional missile threats by our continued close work with allies and partners to improve missile defense capability, integration, and interoperability. MDA has developed and fielded a command and control battle management and communication system that operates in a joint multi-domain environment and connects ground, air, sea, and space sensors and shooters. The C2 BMC system ties in, for example, the Aegis BMD and THAAD weapon systems, as well as our Homeland Defense System. MDA and the Israel Missile Defense Organization continue to cooperate on engineering, development, co-production, testing, and fielding of the Arrow weapon system, the David Sling weapon system, and the Iron Dome defense system. Since October 7, 2023, each of these multi-tiered defense elements have successfully intercepted multiple air and ballistic missile and rocket attacks against Israel and deployed U.S. personnel during Operation Swords of Iron. Finally, MDA will continue to support the Army to meet the Indo-PACOM requirement to deliver a persistent 360-degree integrated air and missile defense capability to defend the people, infrastructure, and territory of Guam from advanced ballistic, hypersonic, and cruise missile threats. Chairman Lamborn, Ranking Member Moulton, members of the subcommittee, I appreciate your continued support for the Missile Defense Agency and the Missile Defense Mission, and I look forward to answering the committee's questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Brigadier General Gill.
Good morning, Chairman Lamborn, Ranking Member Moulton, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thanks for the opportunity to discuss missile defense in the context of the Joint Staff, specifically as we consider combatant commanders and allied demand and service capacity. As you've heard, missile-related threats have rapidly expanded in recent years, and adversary missile systems are showing more maneuver capability as well as greater survivability, reliability, accuracy, and lethality. The increase in adversary capabilities in combatant command demand, Russia's war in Ukraine, and the Israel-Hamas conflict place an ever-increasing strain on joint integrated air and missile defense forces. As you'll hear today, these forces comprise one of the most stressed force elements across the entirety of the joint force. For context, I serve as the Deputy Director for Regional Operations and Force Management in the Joint Staff Operations Director at the J3. I assist in providing policy readiness, force sourcing, and force employment expertise to the Director of Operations, and coordinate with the services and combatant commands on the input to the annual Global Force Management Allocation Plan, the GIFMAP, and the emergent Secretary of Defense Orders Book, SDOB processes. The GIFMAP is our annual strategic force allocation plan built over the course of the entire preceding year that orders forces to deploy in the framework of our department's guiding intent, our national defense strategy. The SDOB process allows combatant commanders to request forces in an emergent manner and source immediate needs in the context of the ever-changing global environment. In this role, the J35 reviews, adjudicates, and recommends allocation decisions through the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the Secretary of Defense on a recurring basis. Additionally, as the focal point for global current and future operations on the Joint Staff, the J35 is responsible for providing directives and communications to and from the Joint Force while ensuring we assist the Chairman in his role as Principal Military Advisor to the Secretary of Defense and the President. Many surmise that global force management is about allocation and assignment of forces and equipment. To be sure, it is, but it's really about prioritization and risk. We've finite joint forces as we contemplate addressing the global challenges that require appropriate military solutions. When the Joint Staff presents recommendations to through the Chairman to the Secretary, the conversation always ends up focusing on risk. Do we risk deploying units early? Do we jeopardize service modernization plans? Or do we mortgage dwell time at home station? Moreover, if the Secretary must decide between combatant commands, where does he assume risk? In a priority theater or in a theater with an emergent requirement? We often discuss the balance between the tactical now and the strategic future. And we always take into consideration the capabilities of our allies and partners. As we cover protecting the force today, I'm prepared to discuss our missile defense contributions as they relate to supporting our allies and partners in the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel-Hamas conflict and their impacts on the safety of our own deployed troops. In conclusion, I share my colleagues' pride in the efforts made by all our service members and their steadfast families in support of these critical missile defense capabilities that protect our nation and its interests. We will continue to work with our service partners and allies to better align our efforts into the overall missile defense architecture. Thank you again for the continued support of the Congress to resource and improve our IAMD capacity and capabilities. I look forward to our discussion and answering your questions.
Thank you, and thank all of you for providing your testimony and for being here today. It was mentioned earlier that there have been some excellent defense by our sailors and soldiers against missiles fired in CENTCOM at our own forces and vessels and at Israeli targets. Would you agree that we've had excellent operations on the part of our sailors and soldiers in shooting down some of these missiles? Admiral Williams and General Gill, would you agree with that assessment?
Thank you for the question, sir. Absolutely agree with that assessment. And I'll offer a vignette. Just over a month ago, sir, we had the opportunity to align with the Navy on a really complex flight test off the coast of Hawaii, and where we fired simultaneously in a raid scenario 2 ballistic missiles and 2 cruise missiles. And the Aegis destroyers successfully intercepted all of those threats simultaneously. And it was a little omniscient because, lo and behold, a few weeks later, the Aegis, ships in the Red Sea we're up against a similar threat, and the weapons system continues to perform as designed with the sailors, the weapons system, the tactics, techniques, and procedures working as we expect it to.
General?
Chairman, thank you. This is exactly why the combatant commanders asked for those assets to be in the region. I think the actions of the Kearney, the Hudner, and the Mason have all demonstrated the discipline of our sailors who deployed to the theater on short notice in some cases and demonstrated their proficiency.
I'm going to ask about rules of engagement here to take a little diversion from my questions I was going to ask, and that is, if targets are in Israel itself, I assume that Israel takes the responsibility for how to respond to the source of those attacks. Although it's wonderful that we can help our partner by shooting down these threats, but when Iranian forces or Iranian proxies are shooting at our ships or our installations in CENTCOM, what are the rules of engagement for us to respond, or do they have impunity to do whatever they want and we just take it, which I hope is not the case?
Chairman, all of our soldiers, sailors, airmen deployed always have the right of self-defense, so that's primary. We also have the Spartan Shield Exord, which gives authority for us to protect our allies in Israel.
Admiral?
I have nothing further to add than what General Gill just added, sir.
Okay. Shifting gears to the production supply lines and production of missiles and precision-guided munitions, part of the administration's supplemental budget request includes $755 million to expand production of Patriot interceptors from 550 to 650 annually. Would you agree that we meet that is something we need, or should we even go beyond that, let's say?
Sir, thank you for the question, specifically reference to the Patriot system. As you know, the Army maintains the Patriot system and runs the Patriot system, and our great soldiers man the Patriot system globally today. Yes, the additional interceptors are welcome. As you know, the Patriot interceptor is in demand globally by the United States and our partners, so any additional help in that area will be very helpful. Thank you.
Do any of you have suggestions on how our nation's supply lines could be better equipped and constituted for future potential demands? I mean, we look at Ukraine, we look at Israel, we look at the threats against Taiwan, and who knows what else might crop up? Starting with you, Secretary, and anyone else.
Certainly. Chairman, I think your previous question about the supplemental, there's also $50 billion in that that's focusing on industrial base, and that's something we've seen. The ability to produce munitions, meet the need, is very important. That would be strengthening that. Additionally, in the NDAA, there's legislation on multi-year procurement. That's another tool we can have to improve our nation's ability to respond rapidly to the rapidly changing environments.
Did you say $50 billion?
Yep.
And what would that go for as far as you know?
There's a variety of investments in industrial base, improving capacity, but certainly with respect to Patriot, other munitions, that's key parts of it, a lot of skilled manufacturing in there.
Do either of the rest of you have any suggestions on improving our nation's production?
Yes, sir. I guess I will just add, we found tremendous value in cooperative development, cooperative production, and foreign military sales. It allows the industrial base, it allows three things, right? It allows the industrial base to be energized, to include potentially foreign nation industrial base, which was the case with our ally Japan when we did the cooperative development for the SM-32A. It allows us to control cost even further. And then it really allows us to improve on the overall integration of the weapons system with our foreign allies, with our partners, and the interoperability, as well as the industrial base capacity, the supply chains that all get energized from these cooperative developments with these foreign military sales, sir.
Well, and I'm really happy to hear about our ongoing cooperation with Japan. They have an excellent manufacturing base and creativity and hard work in their society, and I just think that that's wonderful that we're partnering with them like that.
Yes, sir.
Anything else to add by either of the two generals?
Chairman, the only thing I would add is that we monitor the total munition requirements of the entirety of the force. The chairman holds a readiness tank quarterly right now where we look at the entirety of what we have in the inventory, what our consumption rates are, and so that we can then turn the lever if need be, as we see, particularly as we're providing munitions to some of our allies in the case of Ukraine and Israel.
And, sir, nothing additional to add. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you all for your answers, and I'll turn it over to Ranking Member Moulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. MDA has a responsibility to ensure both the sustainment of missile defense today and to look ahead to ensure sufficient missile defense capabilities into the future. This year, MDA is procuring the minimum sustaining rate of interceptors for THAAD and Aegis. Rear Admiral Williams, do you think MDA has the right balance between the money spent on procurement and the money spent on RDT&E to ensure we can handle the ever-increasing threat from our adversaries?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. Absolutely, I do. And I just will say, you know, MDA has various venues and vehicles to stay tightly coupled and synchronized with the combatant commanders to understand their priorities, their needs. We have, you know, a tremendous number of venues and vehicles to ensure we stay synchronized with the services. And then when we align with defense planning guidance, with resources and our budget, you know, we get together and we deliver capability that gets aligned with the Joint Staff's Global Force Management process that allocates that. And then I will also say, you know, although, you know, our budgets may go down for certain production lines many times, and in case like with THAAD, you know, the production line gets bolstered with, you know, foreign military sales, and in this case, you know, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is procuring, you know, several missile interceptors that keep that production line warm and hot, so that if and when we do have to surge in the later part of the FIT, we can do that, sir.
Got it. Rear Admiral Williams, last year we visited the Aegis Ashore site in Poland, which must have some of the most luxurious accommodations for anyone in the United States Navy on deployment. As a U.S. Marine, I confused the barracks for a five-star resort when I walked in. But while the sailors were enjoying their deployments, MDA remained over half a decade behind schedule, half a decade, in getting the site operational. Given the pace of evolving threats today, this is grossly unacceptable. But what was particularly shocking to me was learning that construction would be completed in what I now understand is a week from today, but then the site would not be operational for months longer because it was going into a maintenance period. Now, forgive my simpleton questions, but I wondered out loud why you would immediately go into a maintenance period right after you'd finished construction. And what I was told is that the reason is because the software needed to be upgraded. All sorts of new systems had to be installed because the original contract was for the old systems. So the question I asked was, how much is the American taxpayer spending to install an entirely outdated software system? And I think I believe there's a lot of hardware associated with it, well, network system, only to have it ripped out on day one and replaced with an upgraded system. We haven't received an answer to that question yet.
Yes, sir. I will find out where we are in answering that question. I will say this, sir. You know, we have statements of work, we have contracts, we have deliverables, and I don't believe, you know, the maintenance that we do is as violent of ripping, you know, hardware out, although hardware may be replaced. We are in a constant.
Whatever it is, we just want to know the cost.
Yes, sir, and I will take that for the record and get back to you to understand the cost, sir.
Thank you. A theme we've heard in this hearing already in previous hearings is how overstretched our regional missile defense capabilities are. Mr. Hill, the administration's missile defense review acknowledged regional missile threats were continuing to grow and emphasized the need to pace these changes, but it did not recommend significant adjustments to U.S. regional missile defense posture or force structure. Do you believe that is still the correct approach? If no force structure changes are needed, could you please describe the department's approach to countering these growing threats?
Yes, thank you, Ranking Member Moulton. In the missile defense review, what we did differently this time than in past years was, first, we integrated it with the National Defense Strategy, wrote them at the same point, recognizing that missile defense is fundamentally not something separate from the national defense. It is part and parcel of that larger whole. The second thing we did was we decided that we were not going to try and identify in 2022 in a document issued in 2022 of fixed targets for the different things we would be needing, but we would be working that through the regular process of the program budget review, the global force management, contingency planning, and we would be adapting what we would need each year as we went through the regular processes, so that if the demand grows and we have situations like we have, we would be flexible and not tied to a document that would be published in 1 year and be static. That's the way we've been implementing it.
Okay. And then briefly, General Gill, you talked about this a little bit with the chairman, but as new threats arise, sometimes on very short notice, for example, the October 7th attack, and a regional and an AOR commander asks for new capabilities, how do you manage the trade-offs, the process for allocating these missile defense capabilities all around the globe?
Thank you, sir. So this gets to the emergent Secretary of Defense orders book process. When a combatant commander has a requirement, they send a request for forces into the Joint Staff. We adjudicate it, we validate it, we check it for legal and policy implications, and then we present the recommendations to the chairman. We always try to take the lens of the immediate problem to be solved in the context of the strategy, and that gets to the point I made earlier about looking at priority theaters versus immediate demand to solve a problem. There is always a balance that's got to be made. The combatant commanders each provide risk statements to us, to the proposed courses of action, and then the chairman considers that in his recommendation to the secretary. Ultimately, Secretary of Defense has to make those hard choices.
Mr. Chairman, in your opening statement, you talked about how limited our magazines are for missile defense all around the world, and of course that's due to how effectively they've been used. But I think we need to dig into a little bit more, not just how the trade-offs that are associated with making these allocations, as General Gill just described, but also the fact that there are certain parts of the world, especially the Pacific, where we simply need to have a lot of missiles ready for deterrence.
Absolutely. I would absolutely agree with that. And now, Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman Lamborn. And Chairman Lamborn was ahead of the curve by bringing up about source of attacks. And so, Secretary Hill, this really concerns me. We're at a war we did not choose. It's Iran. They're puppets, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, trained by war criminal Putin, are attacking our troops. It was brought to our attention yesterday by Lord Cameron, the Foreign Minister of UK, their troops. We've got other allied troops, but they're at direct risk of, and we've already had so many injuries, but over 70 attacks. And I'm very concerned. I believe, and back to rules of engagement, that with the capabilities we have, what can we do by trajectory and by, satellite surveillance, as we waved to the satellite over our head today, what can be done to identify the site of the attack, and why would there not be, as Secretary Panetta said, an immediate response?
Congressman Wilson, you're right to be concerned. What is happening is you're seeing an awful lot of entities, Hamas, Houthis, Lebanese Hezbollah, even Russian forces using equipment provided by Iran. And so the source of that equipment, we know it comes from Iran. You can see, of course, in any particular physical attack, whether it's an attack on Ukraine coming from Russia, or an attack on Israel coming from Gaza, you can see with the overhead, and we can share. We have shared early warning arrangements with many countries.
But back specifically, my concern are rocket attacks on our forces, and we know from Yemen or wherever, we should know, I hope, the exact site. And somehow there should be, back on rules of engagement, announced that there will be an immediate response within 5 minutes once it's identified, so that if it is indeed located at a school or a hospital, which they use human shields, the American people need to know that too. And so why is there not immediate response? It's impressive to attack an empty warehouse, but we need to go after, we need to stop it. I just can't visualize, as a father of 4 sons who served in the Middle East, I would be disgusted if I had family there now, knowing the level of lack of response.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying now. The question of what the United States does in response in a striking back sense is a question that would go to the Secretary of Defense and the President for decisions on that. But certainly the defensive capabilities we have and that we have to support allies right now who are responding in their contexts are in place.
We want President Biden to be successful, Secretary Austin, everybody, and all of you. But we need to respond immediately to stop this, because the loss of life is really inexcusable. And under rules of engagement, I have never gotten over that the sniper at Kabul airport had the suicide bomber in his sights, but rules of engagement prevented saving 13 American lives and 276 Afghanis. And this is setting up, indeed, more human shields by not responding right away. And so I hope this is done. Also, I'm really concerned, Admiral Williams, the defense of the very remarkably strategic American territory of Guam for our national security. The Missile Defense Agency is responsible to integrate the Army Integrated Air and Mobile Defense and Navy Aegis ballistic missile defense in support of the defense of Guam. Is there any additional requirements or resources that the Missile Defense Agency may need to ensure the critical function is established on Guam? Can you highlight the challenges and limitations?
Sir, thank you for the question. And we are aligned to deliver with our service acquisition executive lead, which is the U.S. Army, to deliver the Indo-PACOM requirement of 360-degree Guam defensive system against advanced ballistic missile threats, against hypersonic threats, and against cruise missile threats. The Missile Defense Agency's portion of the defense of Guam system is a command and control system, as well as the Aegis weapon system that will include the SM-3 and SM-6, and then that will integrate with the Army's capabilities and architecture, and it will start showing up in the 27 timeframe per the PB-24 budget, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Representative Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman, and for our witnesses being here today. I'm going to backtrack a little bit on what both the ranking member and the chairman had talked about, and that's our industrial base. Mr. Hill, how would you assess the condition of our domestic industrial base when it comes to the manufacturing of these systems?
Broadly, the industrial base is strong, but there are weaknesses as we've seen in particular areas. The point about munitions that I made before, what we've seen is our ability to respond, not just in the United States. Allies also have seen that their industrial base is not prepared to produce what we would want it to produce. The supply chains also have vulnerabilities where there's reliance, over-reliance on foreign sources that aren't as assured as we would want them to be. So these are areas that need to be addressed, and that's some of what is in the supplemental bills to try and improve on those.
So 2 issues that you mentioned, the foreign materials that are coming in. It's been years since we've identified the vulnerabilities of those. Why would they still be a problem with us, literally 4 years after we really started to look at that problem?
Yeah, the issues of stockpiling, taking time. So when you're dealing with critical minerals where you don't have the production here locally, so you're looking to stockpile, that takes some time.
But stockpiling is above and beyond.
Right.
I understand that.
Understand. So that you'll also have places where sometimes what you're relying on is critical electronic components where when you're wanting to have your assured production of supply chains that you trust, the commercial marketplace that leads to where companies make their investment decisions leads to them wanting to be producing offshore. So you have to work to figure out where will it be acceptable, which allies will it be from, and which things do I then need to pay the extra money to move it onshore, because the regular marketplace that's driven by the commercial demand won't take care of that. Those are some of the factors that go into the industrial-based questions, more in the lane of my acquisition and industrial-based counterparts. But as I see it from the missile defense area, those are the things that relate into the munitions concerns that we have.
You talked about the additional monies that is going into the industrial base. Can you talk about that with a little bit more specificity when it comes to, are we looking at materials, manpower, industrial capacity?
Yes. All of that needs to be part of it. When you're talking about increasing the production rates, you're needing to have, that requires more skilled labor. It results in more investment in plant and
So
facility.
what are we doing to try to get that labor is the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, that's part of the objective of some of the supplemental funding request, is to be able to invest in that capacity. So you would be able to have more production lines working.
I think we're talking past each other.
Okay.
How are we recruiting that next generation? You're saying there is money there, and I understand
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But where's the money being spent? How are we recruiting that next generation of worker?
So that recruitment obviously comes from the companies themselves who do the hiring.
Forgive me, this is the point I'm trying to make. Our industrial base for submarines, very focused on that.
I see.
And what we're doing through Department of Defense and certainly through the Navy is helping to recruit those. Are we looking at that same model for something as critical as this?
I don't know personally on that aspect of industrial base. I'd be happy to take a question back
Okay.
from my colleagues who do industrial base matters.
Thank you. But real quickly, Admiral Williams, you talked about the cooperation with Japan helps control costs. Can you tell us how that helps to control the cost?
Yes, sir.
Or is it the capacity?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. As we work share, as we define the work share, the aspects for, in this case, the example I'll give is SM-32A.
Right.
Japan took ownership of the second and third stage rocket motor development. So that was their allocation that they were able to invest in, which lowered our overall development NRE engineering that we did not have to come up with, and therefore those costs were shared and ultimately lowered the
So it was
overall
the
budget.
development side, not the production side.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Out of time. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Desjardins.
Mr. Hill, the Missile Defense Review emphasized the role of allies and partners in regional missile defense. Can you expand on what this looks like, and how is the department encouraging greater international participation in this regard?
Absolutely. As in my full written statement, I addressed several of these points. One of the things we're doing in the Indo-Pacific area, moving from the immediate fights with Japan and Korea, we've putting in place an ability to do trilateral shared early warning. So they both have radars. They can benefit each other. As we've been able to benefit them bilaterally, now you're having a trilateral arrangement. Of course, in the context of immediate fights in Europe, it's not just the United States that's been supplying Ukraine. Our European allies have provided a tremendous amount, some of them larger shares of their GDP in assistance to Ukraine than what we've been supplying as our GDP, even though our aggregate gross number is quite large, of course. So then in the Middle East, likewise, we're talking about where we deploy. The Gulf countries are some of the largest investors in missile defense assets. And as was noted earlier, their demand is one of the things that keeps our production base open and warm and available and gives us some surge capacity. Those are a few examples, sir.
Okay, thank you. General Gainey, demand for Patriot and THAAD capabilities in recent years has put enormous stress on Army air defenders. This is something that I've personally talked about with General Carbonar on a few occasions. Can you talk about how the Army has tried to manage this and the steps you all have taken to stabilize the force?
Sir, thank you for your question, specifically in that area, and focus on our soldiers. We've asked a lot of our air and missile defense formations, and in every instance, they have responded to every call. However, the cost has been decreased time home. Right now, all of our Patriot units are below the Secretary of Defense red line of deploy 1 year and return home for 2 years. And so it's having a strain on the force. The Army leadership recognizes that strain, and as you heard earlier, put in measures through our Health of the Force initiative to get after initiatives to help improve areas for our soldiers. And the Joint Staff and the leadership has also looked at reducing demand. So we were on a glide path to improve deploy to dwell readiness. However, the global demand, again, has caused those units to fall back below the 1 to 2 red line and will continue to be a challenge. However, the Army leadership will look at other levers to pull within our Health of the Force study to be able to address the challenge with our highly deployed force.
What does the training pipeline for this capability look like? How long does it take the Army to develop a trained air defender?
Yes, sir. So our officers come in, and it's about a 6-month school training before they go to a unit, and same with our soldiers. Our soldiers are 6 to 9 months. They'll get trained and move off to a unit to execute deployment or garrison operations.
Where do the retention rates stand today? And so once you've gotten them in the door, have you made progress in retaining them?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, sir. And again, important aspect of our ability to assess the readiness of our force. The retention remains strong. Our largest air and missile defense formation, the 32nd AAMDC, leads FORSCOM and division size element in retention, and all of our units are at the Army goals for retention.
Is there anything we can do to support the work in this area?
Sir, we appreciate the continued support and the support to the Army modernization. The Army's modernization with the Integrated Battle Command system as the cornerstone of our modernization will allow the branch to build capacity and capability against threats. The ability to integrate all of our sensors and shooters that will provide us the ability through one operator, leverage the best sensor and best shooter, will allow us to reduce the strain on several different organizations deploying to one organization. And so your support in allowing us to maintain funding in that area will be helpful. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all for your testimony today. I yield back.
Representative Vasquez.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hill, General Gainey, Admiral Williams, General Gill, for taking the time to speak with us this morning. I represent New Mexico's 2nd District, and it's the proud home of White Sands Missile Range. White Sands is the birthplace of America's missile and space program, beginning as the original testing site for the first atomic bomb. It continues to serve as the Department of Defense's premier research, development, and testing facility to this day. White Sands is also home to some of our finest service members, contractors, and scientists in this nation. And the research and testing they conduct has been key to developing and deploying many of the missile defense systems that we've discussed today. General Gainey, beyond the contributions that White Sands has made to develop and test many of the weapon systems currently in our arsenal, how can we ensure that White Sands Missile Range continues to be the premier facility that fulfills our modern missile modernization priorities?
And sir, thank you for that question, and thank you for your support to White Sands. As you know, it's a critical component of our testing strategy. White Sands will always be a critical part of the testing environment because it provides the optimal opportunities for us to test our capable systems, not just our current programs of record, but also our future programs that I highlighted in our modernization strategy, our IBCS system and the components that will integrate into IBCS, and also our increment 3 of our integrated fire protection system where we'll start looking at high-powered microwave capability, directed energy capability, and some of our cyber/electronic warfare type capability. White Sands Missile Range provides a great opportunity to test those systems.
Thank you, General. And as we continue to see these destabilizing global events, such as in Ukraine, the Middle East, and escalating tensions with other global powers, I strongly believe that it's important for the United States to have the most robust fighting force possible with the capability to defend our nation. And I've often stated in committee hearings before that if we can design it in New Mexico and test it in New Mexico, we should also be able to build it in New Mexico. So this question is for both Mr. Hill and Admiral Williams. What are the advantages, the strategic advantages of co-locating missile production capabilities in regions like New Mexico, where we already have the research, development, and testing, as well as national labs in places like Wismar?
So thank you for the question, Congressman, and I think all three of us have probably spent some time at White Sands, and so it is a premier and an incredible range and testing range that we've all used. We have leveraged heavily White Sands for the THAAD and the THAAD capabilities, from the development to the incremental upgrades that we do to THAAD. With respects to the aligning production line in the state of New Mexico, from an acquisition perspective, we rely on our prime contractors to really determine their optimum location for production lines. And so I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer your question directly. I just will say, from our regional defense that the Missile Defense Agency is responsible for, our SM-3 class of missiles, those interceptors have a production line in Redstone Arsenal, Alabama, as well as the THAAD production line operated by Lockheed Martin is out of Troy, Alabama. In the future, is there possibility to establish a production line in the state of New Mexico? Absolutely, but that would have to be coordinated with our prime contractors as far as optimally, economically, and just ensuring that, we manage the cost, schedule, performance, and quality coming off that production line.
Thank you. Mr. Hill?
I wouldn't have too much more to add to what my acquisition colleague would say. The prime contractors typically are looking very carefully at where they want to make their investment decisions, and certainly the availability of related types of facilities, related expertise is one of the things they take in mind, as you pointed out.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. And I just continue to stress that in economically depressed states like New Mexico, having the production capability that supports the testing and development of these systems is critically important, especially in our rural communities. And so taking that into account as you are working with contractors, more than just capability or ability and existing facilities, but also the needs of some of these communities that depend and have for many years been the backbone of our missile defense system is also critically important in those considerations as we work with those contractors. Thank you so much, Chairman. I yield back.
Representative Strong.
Thank you, Chairman Lamborn. It's great to be with each of you again today. Thank you for your commitment to Missile Defense Agency. Admiral Williams, I appreciate you taking time to stop by my office yesterday. It's always great getting to chat with someone who loves Huntsville, Alabama, and its role in national security. You think about it, THAAD, SM-3, SM-6, Patriot, PAC-3, along with many others, that is Rocket City, USA. Congratulations again on being able to focus on your actual job, and everyone knows how much you love test. While this hearing is focused on regional missile defense, it's important to remember that the threats facing the United States do not occur in a vacuum. I agree with testimony. THAAD is battle-tested, battle-proven, and we need to increase production. As the Missile Defense Agency has consistently communicated, the missile defense system is an integrated architecture of regional and homeland missile defense capabilities. Accordingly, it is my belief that we should balance our resources appropriately across the architecture. Admiral Williams, I'm concerned by reports that the Department is considering down-selecting to a single design earlier than planned for both the Next Generation Interceptor and the Glide Phase Interceptor programs. I know you cannot comment on pre-decisional matters, but don't you believe a lesson learned from other now canceled portions of the GMD system is the importance of maintaining competition, especially earlier in the program's development?
Sir, thank you. Thank you for the question. And yes, the Missile Defense Agency absolutely embraces, endorses the spirit and intent of competition. And I'll speak to both programs, both the Next Generation Interceptor, NGI, and the Glide Phase Interceptor, GPI. So for NGI, it is a gold standard for competition. We are getting the right behavior by the two competitors. We've accelerated the original baseline by as much as 12 months. We held, a major technical design review with one of the offerers 2 months ago, and we are holding we're holding the first technical design review for the second offerer next month in the month of January. Both offerers are performing. I mean, and we, have really produced an incredibly mature design to date. And so, yes, for PB24, we are baseline to down select after the next major technical design review, known as the critical design review. That's the baseline. Anything beyond that is pre-decisional. But I guess I just will offer this. The department has to make hard decisions. Program managers, we have to make hard decisions at times, and sometimes you have to. Really appreciate where risk is and ensure those resources are prioritized accordingly. Decisions that we make at the department level will be communicated down to the service level and in a very transparent way with, obviously, the Congress and as well as our industrial base. And any down select that we do, ahead of the baseline that's already set, will be communicated and will be very fair.
Thank you. NGI is the future of Homeland Missile Defense, and GPI is the only purpose-built program to defend against hypersonic threats. We don't have other capabilities in the pipeline if these programs fail. Are you concerned about the amount of risk this potential cost-cutting measure that it would add?
So again, sir, I mean, managing risk is a day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade evolution that we do. We are managing that risk appropriately. As I said, with NGI, Congressman, we're really satisfied with the performance and where we are to date with a very mature design. And again, we will ensure we're communicating with our senior leaders if we think we're putting this country and the national security of this country in a bad light, in a bad space. And that is my job, was my job as the acting director, but that will be the job of the director of Missile Defense Agency to ensure that we continue to provide that constructive feedback and that constructive tension to ensure we maximize the national security of this country, sir.
Thank you. If the MGI program failed like its predecessor, what would that mean for the Homeland Missile Defense? That would be an extremely bad thing, and I'm right. I mean, you think about it. We're fortunate there to have both Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman doing an exceptional job, and I think that competition has worked well for our country. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Representative Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the testimony. It is extremely useful. I have one question for each of you. I'd like to start with Mr. Gill. What is the most important lesson that you have learned from the war in Ukraine?
I think the power of a coalition, allies and partners, and what we can do if we all come together.
Now,
Strengthen NATO.
translate that into your task now in missile defense systems.
So I don't have a particular task in my role as the J35 on the Joint Staff. We, however, track all of the things that we donate as a country and what other countries are donating.
I'm going to be very, very clear, gentlemen. A 2-year test of missile defense systems has occurred in Ukraine and is continuing to occur. My question to you is, what is the single most important thing that you have learned from that 2-year war with regard to missile defense? Mr. Gill.
Congressman, I think...
so it's the integration, is that it?
No, I'm going to talk to you about the effectiveness of the weapon system. So we've donated Patriots to the Ukrainians. We haven't shot a Patriot in 20 years. The Ukrainians have used it very effectively against the Russian missile attacks. So I think
going forward, more Patriots.
I think we're seeing very effective use of it.
Thank you. Let's go on down the line.
Yes, sir. And if I could, the missile defense, contributions to the war in Ukraine is mainly through analysis and support with information. But if I could, I'll pivot into the Israeli conflict. And I think the lessons learned with our Israeli allies is critical with the integration of the weapons system writ large with the various subsystems of the Arrow, of David Sling, of Iron Dome to integrate effectively for one, complete command and control picture so that they can, select the optimum, missile system to engage the threats, whether they're coming from Gaza with, rockets or from the Houthis, originating out of Yemen with a ballistic missile shot, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Gainey, Ms. General, excuse me.
Sir, thank you. And in my role as the Joint Counter-UAS Office, the executive agent for the Army, we've looked extensively at the Ukraine conflict. And I can tell you that the use of drones and how we're seeing drones being utilized in that conflict and other conflict highlights the need for an integrated approach, netting all your sensors and shooters together so when you're faced with the appropriate threat, you're able to leverage the appropriate effector against whether it's a drone, cruise missile, or tactical ballistic missile. And this is how the Army's moving forward with the Army modernization, taking our integrated battle command system, netting our sensors into that capability, and then have an effector where you can shoot a Coyote interceptor, counter-drone interceptor, low cost, or you can shoot a IFPC cruise missile capability or a Patriot interceptor, all integrated into one common system. And I think from what we learned in this conflict is validating our approach as we move forward.
Mr. Hill.
Sir, a couple of points on the key thing. First, integrated air and missile defense is why Ukraine remains sovereign. And our alliances are defending interests that are fundamental to American national interests. In Israel, integrated air and missile defense has given Israel options, as was mentioned, I think, in the ranking member's testimony, not just to have to always just hit back immediately. They have options. It's very important in that sense. The investments that we need to continue making, and frankly, we need to improve our industrial base ability to support that, are fundamental to the credibility of our commitments around the world that are in our fundamental national interests.
That's
Thank you,
fine.
sir.
Now, in the next 49 seconds, what do you need from us to do what each one of you said is the most important, and that is the integration of the existing systems that we have? What do you need? We have a $106 billion supplemental that speaks to part of this. We have the NDAA out there, and we have the appropriations out there. Do you have in those pieces of legislation what you need to achieve what you have said is your principal lesson that you've learned? Mr. Hill, this is your turf. Yes or no? Do you have it?
Yes,
If not, why not?
In those and in full appropriations, sir. Those are the things that we need. Yes, sir.
Between the two, that is the supplemental and the appropriate and the NDAA.
Yeah, the supplemental, the multi-year procurement that's in the NDAA, for example, and regular appropriations are just fundamental to doing the business of the Defense Department.
Then I shall focus my time on what you gentlemen have suggested we spend, that you're spending your time on. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Houlihan.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I apologize for being late. I hope that these questions haven't already been asked, and if so, I apologize for that as well. I serve as one of the people on the Quality of Life panel, one of the leads on that panel, and I know Rep. Bacon would probably ask the same sorts of questions, General Gainey. You mentioned a little bit about recruiting, retention, the op tempo, how long people are being deployed for, and that you were happy with retention rates, but I was wondering if you could kind of go into some of the quality of life improvements that perhaps that you have been making, and if there are any further ones that we should be focused on the quality of life panel.
Absolutely, ma'am, and thank you for that question. And that was one of the areas that I wanted to highlight when I highlighted my answer earlier, that support to the quality of life programs will also be a critical part to continue the improvement in getting after the health of force initiatives. The air and missile defense formations, as I highlighted earlier, are the most deployed formations in the Army. And several times, those systems are deployed early into an environment, and the quality of life facilities aren't in place for the soldiers as they deploy into those locations, and they're often built around the unit. And so over time, the quality of life initiatives arrive. However, as we build our Defense of Guam Army architecture, we are looking at MILCON and quality of life on the forefront. And we can use your help in ensuring that we get the MILCON funding so that when our soldiers move into the Defense of Guam to occupy their systems, that they have quality of life initiatives in place to support them.
It's very helpful. My next question is for DASD Hill, but I'm actually quite interested in everybody's response. And again, apologies if this has been asked. I was listening to some conversation about Ukraine. But DASD Hill, you wrote in your testimony and emphasized the importance of continued support of Ukraine, and that this has been essential in their successful campaign against Russia and keeping their sovereignty. As you probably are following, this is pretty contentious here on the Hill, and I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on why you think it's so important to continue to support Ukraine.
Ukraine is fighting NATO's and America's battle. They are facing a threat from Russia, from Moscow, Putin, that is the same threat that we decided over 75 years ago we were going to stand up against. Ukraine has demonstrated that you can't put over-reliance on hoping that somebody has changed their ways, and they're paying a terrible price for it. Our commitment to Ukraine demonstrates the credibility of the commitments we make all around the world, and standing up and supporting Ukraine in that fight is standing up and supporting American national interest.
In its relevance to this particular hearing, are you aware of any outstanding requests that they have for missile systems that are unaddressed right now?
The concern is what needs to be funded yet to come. That's the biggest part of it. My colleagues may have many more specifics on that, but I think it's what's yet to come and needing that continued funding to keep the sustainment.
Do you all have things to offer there?
Yes, Congresswoman. So we track every bullet, every missile that we send to Ukraine, and we track a burnout date. We're going to get to a point where we can't keep up the production level with what our contributions are. And so, you know, in terms of providing them more, we're going to get to a point where we're not going to be able to deliver. So it gets a little bit to the conversation about the industrial base and making sure that the industrial base is producing at pace, but it's also some funding.
Do you also share the perspective that we need to continue funding Ukraine in their battle?
I absolutely agree with Mr. Hill's point. This is our credibility as a Western nation that believes in the rule of law. So I do. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Gentlemen, anything further in that subject?
Nothing further to add from me, ma'am. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. I want to thank all the witnesses for your very helpful testimony. I think members have asked a lot of excellent questions as well. Because of impending votes, we won't be having a second round of questions, and we won't be having a closed hearing, so the subcommittee is adjourned.